winter of 1878, a Canadian trapper named Swift Runner murdered and devoured his entire family. When authorities found him, he claimed he had no choice. Something had gotten inside him, something hungry, something that would never, ever stop feeding. What you're about to hear isn't just folklore. It's a warning that is echoed through the frozen forests of North America for thousands of years. And if you're watching this alone, in the dark, you might want to reconsider, because the Wendigo, it knows when you're alone. This is the true story of the monster that turns humans into cannibals. And it's still out there, waiting, watching, starving.
Picture this. You're alone in the northern wilderness. It's 3 in the morning. The temperature has plummeted to 20 below zero. The snow beneath your feet squeaks with each step. That distinctive sound that only happens in bone-deep cold. Your breath crystallizes instantly, hanging in the air like frozen ghosts. And then you hear it, a sound that doesn't belong, a cracking, splintering noise, like tree branches breaking. But it's moving, getting closer. You spin around, your flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating nothing but endless trees and swirling snow. But you feel it. Every primal instinct in your body is screaming at you to run, because somewhere in that darkness, something is watching you with eyes that glow like dying embers. Something impossibly tall, 8, maybe 10 feet, so emaciated that you can see every bone beneath its ashen, frost-bitten skin. Its ribcage protrudes grotesquely, yet somehow, impossibly, it moves with terrifying speed and purpose. This is the Wendigo. But here's what makes it truly horrifying. This thing, this abomination stalking you through the snow, it used to be human. It had a name, a family, a life, until the hunger took over. The indigenous peoples of the Algonquin nations, the Ojibwe, the Cree, the Innu, they've known about this creature for longer than written history, and their descriptions, they'll freeze your blood. The Wendigo stands between 15 and 20 feet tall in some accounts, though others describe it as only slightly larger than a man, twisted and wrong. Its skin is pulled so tight over its skeleton that it looks like a walking corpse, gray-green like something pulled from a frozen grave. Some say it's covered in matted fur. Others claim its skin is smooth, almost translucent, so you can see the dark shapes of organs beneath. But everyone agrees on the eyes, those terrible sunken eyes that burn with an unholy hunger, yellow, red, glowing with a light that has nothing to do with life and everything to do with endless, aching need. Its mouth is too large, too wide, filled with broken yellow teeth or sharp fangs depending on who's telling the story. The lips are often torn away, stretched beyond repair, revealing blackened gums. And the smell, oh God, the smell. Witnesses who claim to have encountered a Wendigo all report the same thing, the overwhelming stench of rot, of carrion, of death itself. It's the smell of the grave, of bodies left too long in the sun, of meat gone rancid. Some legends add even more horrifying details. Antlers or horns sprouting from its skull, hands that have transformed into razor-sharp claws, a heart made of ice that can never be melted, never be warmed. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, it's still hungry, always hungry, forever hungry. A Wendigo can devour an entire human being and grow proportionally, becoming even larger, even more gaunt, even more desperate to feed. The more it eats, the more it needs to eat. It's a curse of eternal starvation, a hunger that can never be satisfied, no matter how much flesh it tears apart and swallows. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine being so hungry that eating only makes you hungrier, that fullness is impossible, that satisfaction is a cruel joke, that every meal is just a momentary distraction from the gnawing, all-consuming need that defines every second of your existence. That's the true horror of the Wendigo. It's not just a monster, it's a monster that suffers, and it wants you to suffer too.
Now here's the question that should terrify you. How does something like this come into existence? What could possibly transform a human being into a creature of such absolute evil? The answer is worse than you think. Because you don't have to be bitten. You don't have to be cursed by a witch. You don't need to read from an ancient book or perform a dark ritual. All you have to do is eat. Let me take you back to the brutal winters of the northern forests, where temperatures drop to 40, 50, even 60 below zero, where the sun barely rises for months at a time, where the snow piles up so high that entire lodges can be buried overnight. Food is scarce, game has migrated south or gone into hibernation, the fish are locked beneath feet of solid ice. Your stored supplies are running low, your children are crying from hunger pains, your spouse is too weak to stand. Days pass, then weeks. Desperation sets in like frostbite, creeping through your thoughts, numbing your morality. And then someone dies. Maybe it's the cold, maybe it's starvation, but now there's meat, fresh meat, meat that could keep the others alive just a little longer. The thought is repulsive, unthinkable, a violation of everything sacred. But you're so hungry, so hungry. This is where the Wendigo is born. According to Algonquin tradition, the moment human flesh passes your lips, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of your intentions, something changes. Not just spiritually, but fundamentally. An evil spirit, ancient and malevolent, recognizes the violation. It sees the door you've opened, and it steps inside. The transformation doesn't happen all at once. It's insidious. First, you feel guilty, ashamed, but also relieved. The hunger pangs fade. You have energy again. You tell yourself it was necessary, that you had no choice, that anyone would have done the same. But then you notice you're still hungry, hungrier than before, actually. The regular food tastes like ash in your mouth, flavorless, unsatisfying. But when you think about the other meat, your mouth waters. No, you can't think like that. You're not a monster. But you're so very, very hungry. The hunger grows. It becomes an obsession. You can't sleep. You can't think about anything else. You look at the people around you, your family, your friends, and you start to see them differently. Not as people, as food, as solutions to this unbearable need. Your body begins to change. You lose weight despite eating. Your skin takes on a grayish pallor. Your eyes sink deeper. You feel cold all the time, a cold that comes from inside, from your very core. Your heart feels like it's freezing solid in your chest. And then you hear it, a voice, not external, internal, whispering, urging, promising that if you just feed again, just one more time, the hunger will stop. But it's lying. The hunger never stops, because you're not human anymore. You're Wendigo. This wasn't just a campfire story designed to scare children. This was a very real psychological and spiritual safeguard embedded in indigenous culture. The taboo against cannibalism wasn't just a moral guideline, it was a survival mechanism.
because in those harsh northern winters, when starvation was a genuine threat, the temptation was real. The Wendigo legend drew a line that could not be crossed. It made the consequences of cannibalism so terrifying, so absolute, that people would rather die than take that step. It protected the community's humanity in the face of the most extreme desperation. But there's another path to becoming a Wendigo, one that doesn't require physical cannibalism at all: greed. The Wendigo is the ultimate embodiment of insatiable appetite, not just for flesh, but for anything: power, wealth, resources, control. In traditional Algonquin society, survival depended on cooperation. Food was shared, resources were distributed according to need. Individualism at the expense of the community was not just discouraged, it was dangerous. Because when winter came, when the hunting was poor, when supplies ran low, a community survived together or died together. But there were always those who hoarded, who took more than their share, who let others starve while their own storehouses remained full, who placed their personal gain above the welfare of the tribe. These people, according to the legends, were also vulnerable to Wendigo possession. Their spiritual gluttony, their inability to ever have enough, opened the same door as physical cannibalism. The Wendigo spirit recognized a kindred hunger, and it took residence. This is why the Wendigo represents something more than just a monster in the woods. It's a symbol of the darkest aspects of human nature: unchecked greed, selfish consumption, the willingness to devour others, literally or figuratively, to satisfy yourself. Sound familiar? In our modern world of billionaires hoarding wealth while others starve, of corporations destroying the environment for profit, of endless consumption and waste, the Wendigo isn't some ancient, irrelevant myth. It's a mirror, and we might not like what we see reflected back.
But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Because the Wendigo doesn't just exist in folklore. It manifested as a real, documented psychological condition: Wendigo psychosis. Yes, that's an actual term that was used in psychiatric literature. Imagine this. You're a member of an Algonquin community in the 1800s. You've grown up hearing the stories. You've been taught from childhood about the terrible fate that awaits those who commit the ultimate taboo. The fear of the Wendigo is as real to you as the fear of fire or freezing to death. And then winter comes, a harsh one. Food grows scarce. You start having thoughts, terrible thoughts, thoughts you can't control. You look at the people around you and you feel hungry. You're horrified by these intrusive thoughts, but they keep coming, getting stronger, more vivid, more tempting. You become convinced that you're turning into a Wendigo, that the spirit has already entered you, that it's only a matter of time before you lose control and hurt someone. You beg your community to kill you before you transform completely, before you hurt someone, before the monster takes over. This actually happened. Multiple documented cases exist of individuals experiencing these exact symptoms. The most famous case is Swift Runner, whom I mentioned at the beginning. In 1878, this Cree man was found alone at a camp where his entire family had disappeared. When questioned, he eventually confessed to murdering and cannibalizing his wife, 6 children, his brother, and his mother-in-law. His defense? He was possessed by the Wendigo spirit. He had no control. The hunger was too strong. He was convicted and hanged, but his case sparked intense debate. Was he insane? Was he simply a murderer using cultural beliefs as an excuse? Or had the psychological power of the Wendigo legend become so strong that it manifested as a genuine compulsion? Western psychiatrists attempted to explain this as a culture-bound syndrome, a mental illness that only manifests in specific cultural contexts.
But that explanation feels inadequate, doesn't it? Because it dismisses the cultural reality of the people who experienced it. To them, Wendigo psychosis wasn't a mental illness, it was a spiritual crisis. The line between the two was non-existent. And here's the truly chilling part. The fear itself became self-fulfilling. The more you feared becoming a Wendigo, the more you saw the signs. The more you saw the signs, the more certain you became. The more certain you became, the more your behavior changed, until the psychological became indistinguishable from the spiritual. Was the Wendigo spirit real? Or did belief in it make it real? That's a question that will haunt you long after this video ends.
So, how did we get from a deeply sacred, culturally significant spiritual entity to the generic deer skull monster you see in every horror video game? The corruption began in 1910. British author Algernon Blackwood published a novella simply titled The Wendigo. It's a masterfully written piece of horror fiction, genuinely unsettling and atmospheric. But Blackwood wasn't Algonquin. He wasn't indigenous. He was an outsider looking in, taking a story he'd heard secondhand and reshaping it to fit his own narrative purposes. In Blackwood's version, the Wendigo became a kind of nature spirit, a mysterious, elemental force of the wilderness that snatched people away and drove them mad. It was about the terror of the unknown, the vast indifference of nature to human suffering. Which sounds scary, right? And it is. But it completely stripped away the cultural context. There was no discussion of cannibalism as a taboo, no exploration of greed and communal values, no understanding of the Wendigo as a consequence of moral transgression. It became just another monster, an obstacle, a threat. From there, the floodgates opened. Stephen King referenced Wendigo in Pet Sematary. Marvel Comics created a Wendigo character. The TV show Supernatural featured them. Video games like Until Dawn turned them into fast-moving, zombie-like creatures. And somewhere along the way, someone decided that Wendigos should have deer skulls for heads. Let me be clear, that is not part of the original legend. The deer skull imagery comes from mixing up the Wendigo with entirely different creatures from different indigenous cultures. But it looked cool and creepy, so Hollywood ran with it. Now if you Google Wendigo, that's what you see. A tall, emaciated figure with antlers and a skull face. It's cultural appropriation at its finest. Take a sacred story from a marginalized culture, strip away all the meaning and context, add some scary elements from completely different traditions, and sell it as entertainment. And look, I'm not saying you can't enjoy horror fiction that features Wendigos. I'm not saying creators can't be inspired by folklore from different cultures. But there's a difference between respectful adaptation and exploitative appropriation. When you reduce the Wendigo to just another monster to shoot in a video game, you're erasing its significance. You're disrespecting the cultures that created and maintained this story for thousands of years. You're treating indigenous beliefs as a resource to mine for profitable content, rather than as living traditions that deserve respect. The Wendigo isn't public domain. It's not a Creative Commons monster that anyone can use however they want. It belongs to specific indigenous nations. And maybe, just maybe, we should listen to what they have to say about how their sacred stories are being used. Many indigenous creators and educators have spoken out about this. They've asked for more thoughtful, respectful portrayals, for acknowledgement of the source, for an understanding that this isn't just a cool monster, it's a teaching, a warning, a piece of cultural heritage. But Hollywood mostly doesn't listen, because scary deer skull monsters sell movie tickets and video games.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, fascinating history lesson, but come on, the Wendigo isn't real. It's just a legend, right? Tell that to the people who claim to have encountered one. Even today, reports come in from the northern forests, from Canada, from Minnesota, from Michigan, from Montana. From anywhere the winter gets cold enough and the wilderness deep enough. They describe the same things over and over. A sound, a scream that doesn't match any known animal, high-pitched and agonized, but also somehow hungry. It echoes through the trees and seems to come from everywhere at once. Tracks in the snow, impossibly large, bipedal, but the stride is wrong, too long, covering distances that shouldn't be possible in a single step. A smell, that distinctive odor of decay, carried on the wind even in the dead of winter when nothing should be decomposing. And that feeling, that overwhelming primal terror, the absolute certainty that you're being hunted, that something is watching you in the darkness, that you need to run now before it's too late. In 2019, a group of hikers in northern Ontario reported an experience that went viral on Reddit. They were 3 days into a winter camping trip when they started hearing the screams. Every night around 2 a.m., the same sound, getting closer. On the 4th night, one of them stepped outside the tent to investigate. He claimed he saw something at the tree line, something tall, too tall. It moved wrong, he said, like its joints bent in the wrong places. He ran back to the tent. They packed up in the dark and hiked out immediately, not waiting for morning. When they got back to civilization, they discovered that all their food was still in their packs. They'd been so terrified that they'd forgotten to even check what they were carrying. But one thing was missing. One of their group members had brought deer jerky, venison, meat. The bag was torn open, empty, but it had been in the middle of a sealed backpack. Coincidence? Probably. Animal got into it somehow? Maybe. Or maybe something else was hungry. In 2021, a park ranger in Minnesota who requested anonymity submitted a report that still bothers him. He was doing a routine patrol in the Boundary Waters when he found a campsite, empty, tents still standing, fire still smoldering, food half-eaten, but no people and no tracks leaving the site except his own. He radioed it in. A search was conducted. They never found the campers, but they did find something else. Claw marks on the trees around the campsite, deep gouges starting about 10 feet up, drag marks in the dirt leading away from the camp, but they just stopped in the middle of a clearing, like whatever made them simply lifted into the air. The official report listed it as a likely animal attack, with the bodies probably dragged away by scavengers, but the ranger doesn't believe that. He spent 30 years in those woods. He knows what bear marks look like. He knows what wolves do. This was something else. So what's the truth? Are these genuine encounters with a supernatural entity, or are they the product of suggestion, folklore, and the very real isolation and danger of wilderness areas? Honestly, we can't know for sure. But consider this. Indigenous peoples lived in these lands for thousands of years before European contact. They developed sophisticated cultures, complex languages, detailed knowledge of their environment. They weren't stupid, they weren't primitive. They were and are intelligent, observant people. When they say there is something in these woods, something dangerous, something beyond natural explanation, maybe we should listen. Maybe the Wendigo is a metaphor made literal, a cultural teaching that manifested in the physical world through generations of belief and fear. Or maybe there really is something out there, something ancient, something that hungers. Either way, the next time you're in the deep woods, in the dead of winter, and you hear something that doesn't sound quite right, pay attention.
The Wendigo is many things. It's a monster, a cautionary tale, a symbol of greed and consumption, a psychological phenomenon, a sacred story, a corrupted pop culture icon. But most importantly, it's a mirror. The Wendigo shows us what we become when we let our hungers for food, for wealth, for power, for more, always more, consume us completely. When we're willing to devour others to satisfy ourselves. When we hoard while others starve. When we take and take and take, never satisfied, never full. In our modern world, we're surrounded by Wendigos. They run corporations that prioritize profit over people. They create systems that concentrate wealth while millions go hungry. They consume the Earth's resources with no thought for future generations. They wear suits instead of matted fur. They live in penthouses instead of frozen forests. But the hunger is the same. Insatiable, destructive, endless. And perhaps in our own small ways, we all have a little Wendigo inside us. That voice that says more when we already have enough. That impulse to hoard rather than share. That willingness to step on others to elevate ourselves. The indigenous peoples who created the Wendigo legend understood something fundamental. The greatest monsters aren't the ones with claws and fangs. They're the ones that live inside us, born from our worst impulses, fed by our darkest choices. So the next time you feel that chill in the deep woods, that sense of being watched, ask yourself, are you afraid of what's out there in the darkness? Or are you afraid of what might be growing inside you? The Wendigo is patient. It's been waiting for thousands of years, and it's still hungry. If this video sent chills down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the darkest corners of folklore and legend. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever experienced something in the wilderness that you couldn't explain? What legendary creature should I investigate next? And remember, when you're alone in the dark, you're never truly alone. The Wendigo is always watching, always waiting, always hungry. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there.